All right. What about now?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Oh, yay. Wonderful. You're magic. Good job.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Thank you.
We can hear you now. All right. You ready for this? All right. You are ready.
Does she need to be able to see me? Hey, Dr. Sumner.
Hey.
How are you?
You're fine. I can see your presentation.
Okay, perfect.
Excellent. All right.
All right.
I finally got smarter and realized you need to host off of a different computer than this.
Oh, yes. Good.
Oh, yeah.
And that way you have a control panel and you can get it to work. We tried to use it off of this. We never successful.
Well, the problem is when my original email was deleted, I no longer have a Zoom link that will let, I don't have a pro account anymore. So.
That was fun.
All right. So you're going to be right
I'll
back
be
there.
this good spot.
So
This
she
time
can
next
see
time.
you.
Yeah, I'll come over here too.
And we'll come over on this side so she can see you at the same time.
All right.
Whew, okay.
Thank you all for joining us, Carrie.
Thank you.
So glad we've gotten to this point.
Mhm.
So excited for you.
Me too.
So
Questions up already.
you're good. So as we go, basically, we will just ask questions, if that's okay with you, Carrie, as we have them. As I've told Carrie, we probably won't have the bulk of our questions until we get to chapter 3. And that's probably where it'll come from. I will also take notes. Okay. So as we go. Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So without any further ado, we turn it over to you.
And feel free during this time to ask me questions if you feel like you need to in between. Same for you, Dr. Sumner. I did make a couple of changes to the proposal since I've sent it to you. I printed these off for you, and basically the changes are just highlighted in yellow. But let me stress that they haven't been changed. It's just where the change will eventually occur, because I wanted to talk to you about the change first before I go through and make those big changes. But where they're highlighted will be where they will happen. And Dr. Sumner, I emailed you a up-to-date copy with the highlights as well. Okay, are we ready? All right. So, thank you for being here. I am proposing for you today to do a study about what teachers say versus what they do. And I will be examining the relationship of teacher dispositions and teacher behaviors as it impacts on the learning environment. So I just want to thank Dr. Clark, Dr. Lamb, Dr. Sumner. I'm honored beyond measure that you are a part of my committee. So I thank you so much for being a part of this journey with me. A proposal outline just to show you how this is going to work today. I'm going to go through my background. I will briefly touch on an introduction, explain my theoretical framework, highlight some points from my literature review, discuss my research questions, and then dive deep into that methodology to explain how I'm going to answer those research questions. The purpose of this research is to search for what dispositions practicing teachers exhibit that demonstrate support or lack of support for student success, and how the learning environment is impacted by teacher characteristics, their beliefs, and their practices. It's meant to explore deep-seated beliefs teachers have about teacher professionalism, their ethical practice of teaching, and moral actions in the classroom. This study is intended to help educators become aware of the importance of the role professional teacher dispositions play in the classroom. My background, I want to share with you why this topic is so important to me. And when I started thinking about how I wanted to share this with you, it went really well as I wrote it almost like a speech. So I'm going to read it to you, and I hope that the impact will be successful. When I began teaching as a kindergarten teacher in a Title I school, I met another kindergarten teacher who had already decided to get her master's in education. I was taken aback by her decision. How could she already have set such a goal? How could she already know what she wanted and needed to be in her life? I began to reflect on my own decisions. I had convinced myself that a master's degree wasn't in my future. Voices in my head continued to say, too late. You're not one of those students with drive, and you aren't smart enough. It's very true. Why was I feeling this way? What had I experienced as a student that drove my beliefs about myself as a learner? But after many soul-searching conversations with my two amazing parents, who are also educators, and through their constant encouragement and support, I made the decision that getting my master's was something that I could and should do. So after graduating with my master's in curriculum and instruction, I began to see the educational world in a different light. I learned the value of reflection and how important it was to understand my role as the key variable in the classroom. I wanted to know how my reactions to difficult situations in the classroom reflected my own beliefs about children, teaching, and learning. As I continued on this growth journey, I developed a keen interest in talking with and observing my peers. I became very aware of what they said they believed and how they behaved in the classroom, and often these two things weren't aligned. Is this what I had experienced as a student? I believe the answer is yes. It was this realization that drove my decision to make a personal commitment to be an even stronger leader. I discovered Gardner-Webb University and pursued my administrative certification. I met some wonderful educators and began to truly understand my place as a learner and my passion for helping children learn in a positive environment. Since then, I've served in several different roles: literacy coach, intervention teacher, and now an academic language coach serving 6 elementary schools. I'm passionate about working hard to hold my district accountable for truly reflecting its professed core values, beliefs, and personal ethics in the school setting, because I want to be part of helping teachers gain an awareness of how they say and what they say and do reflects their professional dispositions, and hope this study can contribute to creating a powerful mindfulness about the impact teachers have on their students in the classroom. So this brings me to chapter 1, my introduction. Research indicates that teachers can make a difference in students' academic success. For many years, teacher quality and effectiveness has focused on 2 factors: teachers' knowledge of the curriculum and teachers' possession of the skills to teach that knowledge to students. A third key factor, essential to understanding the professional principles, is often overlooked, and it should be considered, if educators are to have a significant impact on increasing achievement gaps, improving levels of proficiency, and establishing consistently high-performing schools, we need to start focusing on professional dispositions. Professional dispositions are often referred to as teacher characteristics, which encompass a broad range of features, from external characteristics such as teacher's education, teacher experience, teacher training, to internal characteristics such as teachers' values, their beliefs, their perceptions, their critical thinking. Professional dispositions in this sense really focus on teachers' professional behaviors, such as their attitude, their attendance, their work ethic, their planning, their sense of humor, and their capacity to self-reflect. The problem is, currently practicing teachers are not demonstrating professional dispositions in correlation with their knowledge and skills, which impact a successful learning environment. The achievement gap identifies 3 complex levels with variables of factors that pertain to problems around the school systems. There's the school and district leadership level, the classroom level, and then the student level. Significantly, at the classroom level, a listed factor states that there are limited beliefs of students' readiness and abilities as a listed factor of the achievement gap. In 2014, the term belief gap was widely described as the divide between what some parents believe their children are capable of doing and what some teachers, through their words and behaviors, believed the very same children were capable of doing. In 2016, in the district in which I currently work, there was a belief study conducted in 28 schools. 50% teachers that participated in this study responded that they did not believe that all of their students could perform at grade level, even given sufficient support. And in 2018, the National Center for Educational Statistics, and CES, reported that there had been little to no improvement in math and reading skills since 2015, since there were acts put in place for some of these struggling schools. So why might this third factor be overlooked? Perhaps there is problems in assessing dispositions. Maybe it's too difficult to define and operationalize in programs to prepare teachers. Most constructive feedback that teachers get is around their knowledge and their skills. Perhaps there's a complexity of assessing dispositions, the lack of understanding the meaning. There are a plethora of definitions about dispositions. How do you fairly assess someone's dispositions, their beliefs and values? And then which teacher dispositions impact teacher effectiveness? Assessing, tracking, and monitoring. Most research describe the importance of ensuring beginning or pre-service teachers entering the field of education were well prepared in those three areas of knowledge, skills, and dispositions. I did not find any research where there is assessing, tracking, and monitoring for currently practicing teachers in all three of those areas. My theoretical framework connects with Albert Bandura's social cognitive theory. Social cognitive theory is the theoretical perspective in which learning by observing others is the focus of the study. So Bandura's social cognitive theory provides a framework for how dispositions were shaped and controlled by environmental influences, peer-to-peer interactions, behaviors that they exhibit as educators in relation to their own self-efficacy. His theory suggests how people control their behaviors and were reinforced by these dispositions. They can be altered throughout these environmental influences and peer-to-peer interactions. His theory implies that the beliefs that teachers developed and exhibited were brought to their institutions and influenced what and how they taught in the learning environment. So Albert Bandura's theory explains how environmental factors and personal cognitive factors can influence the learning that occurs within a social context, in this case, dispositions. This is his reciprocal causation model.
Carrie, I think this is really an interesting underpinning for this, because I think a lot of this is the reason why you didn't find any research focused on in practicing. Because once it's assessed in pre-service areas, at that point, we're just like, well, if they're getting a job and they're in there, they're doing it. So
that's why I was excited about some of the, I'm going to highlight for you a researcher that really dove into that, seeking how to fix that.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, that's the good news. I already wrote this note down. That's also the bad news.
Yes.
That there's not, that you have identified that your social cognitive theory as your theoretical framework. There's not a lot of literature in service. So when we get to chapter 5, you're going to have to link your findings back to Bandura.
Okay.
We have every doctoral student here in the School of Ed at Gardner-Webb does that. Doesn't matter which discipline. You have to take what you found. See, this is kind of like, you tell us up front what you think you're going to find. You think that that your study is based on this, on SCT, social cognitive theory, and that kind of predicts what you're going to find. The problem is there's no prediction on what you're going to find, because there's not a lot of in-service data that says this is what we expect, because
there's no data.
There's no data.
Right, it's not there.
So the trick is now, how are you going to link this back to the data of what predicts your theoretical framework basically predicts what your study is going to find. And then you compare your results to what the literature said you should find.
Right.
There's no literature that says what you should find.
Right. I'm hoping my phenomenological approach will help with that.
That's on the qualitative side. I saw some questions in there. I was hoping that's what you would say.
Yes,
That's the argument you're gonna have to make.
yes, and I've
But you're
changed
not
that a
gonna-
little bit, so I'll go into more
I
depth.
saw that you
Yes.
had highlighted some of that. What I saw when I read this is what a great study, but you're limited by, there's nothing to compare it back to. And that is the final piece that we require in all of these, is you've got to link what you found back to the research and that's out there in this area. There is none. And so I think on the qualitative side, the phenomenology work that you would do would be your argument to say, yes, I found what I expected to find, or I didn't find what was expected, and this was what. You're going to have to argue this is what should be expected, and this is what I find, and do they, since you're using a convergent model, that's basically what you're going to have to do.
Okay.
And so your qualitative, and you can't do a quantitative and then develop your qualitative out of it. You're going to have to do them at the same time, convergent, because there is no review of literature to do in this area. So your model is correct here that you've got, but remember, it's going to be difficult to write 5, but remember how to write 5 based on, I did this convergent theory model from Cresswell, and I did this because I didn't have any data to go off of to begin with on teachers in service in terms of their dispositional data. There was none. I'm basically creating that through my qualitative work, and that you argue, this is what I should have found. I did for this reason, or I didn't for that reason. Is that?
Yeah, and I think that that's basically what she's going to find. Either it did or did not, based on their environmental influences and their interactions. I think it's going to be pulled out based on the changes that Carrie's made recently. I agree. I think that the changes that she's made, and we get into that, really make this do what it needs to do so she can get back to this.
Yeah. So this
Yeah.
is where you got to end. This is where you start, but you got to end in the same place.
Right.
And so I think methodology wise, you're dead on what you've got to do here with the changes that you've got. I had a couple of questions, but I always go back and look at the answers first. I've already skimmed those, and so I think when you change that piece, you'll be able to write chapter 5 then. See, when I read this, I'm going, how in the world are you going to write chapter 5?
Yeah, I was feeling that when I went through this in depth, and
We talked about
yes,
Yeah.
yes. I said, uh-oh.
You'd be great up to chapter 4, but then when you got to chapter 5, what are you going to do now, hero?
Right. Okay.
It's not. And see, chapter 5, I know that we think 3 is the hardest and it's the wonkiest and all that. But everybody, just like me, turns to the back. Everybody reads chapter 5. Chapter 5 is really all that matters.
Right.
Chapter 4 is just for us if we put the checks in the box.
Yeah.
Chapter 5 is what matters in terms of the field of discipline. Is chapter 5. And if you can't write chapter 5, it's kind of an exercise in futility. You can't write 5.
I'll find a way to write chapter 5.
Well, you got it now.
You got it now. And that's why we do this, so that we can have these conversations
Yeah.
to make sure you
Yes, I
can write
welcome
chapter
your
5.
Yeah,
questions.
and, so that you
Trust me, I
can
do.
write 5.
Perfect.
5 is the most important. Any work that you do out of this, any articles you publish, these things, they'll come out of 5. And this is what adds to the discipline, to the profession, is what comes out of 5. And so, even though it's kind of almost an afterthought, you're like, got through data collection and animals and findings, it's the part you got to settle down and actually take more time than you think.
So link it back.
I like working with smart people.
I know, right? She's a good one.
All right. You ready to move on?
Mhm.
Dr. Sumner, are you okay? All right, I'm going to highlight some points from the literature review for you. Martin Haberman was basically my rock, my foundation for where a lot of this stemmed from. He believed that teachers' moral judgments affected the way that they perceived what happens in the classroom and how they make decisions to perform. He studied teacher beliefs and dispositions, and his philosophy was based on teacher preparation as a matter of school success. For over 5 decades, he studied successful and failing practitioners' beliefs because he wanted to identify what beliefs triggered certain behaviors. He interviewed over 5,000 teachers, and he concluded that the great teachers, the star teachers, had similar belief systems about teaching and learning and demonstrated that through their professional behaviors and fine art of teaching. What I really like about Haberman is this, and I was going to tell you about someone who, what you were talking about, how this helps later identify those teachers. He created a pre-screener tool that he could identify star teachers and even star administrators. It let him find weak teacher professional dispositions that, because he realized that it was those dispositions were affecting student performance. So this star teacher pre-screener tool was he used through his research these measurable skills and dispositions. I think I found 14, it was condensed down to 9, and now it's condensed down to these 7. So this pre-screener tool asks teachers questions about their persistence, about their professional versus a personal orientation to learners, how do they approach students at risk, their ability to adapt to theories of pedagogical practice, their values about student learning, their ability to navigate school bureaucracy, and then their fallibility. So all those questions, and I even took this survey because I wanted to see where I fell on it, and then where were the areas that I was weak. So it really weeds out this. It's like a pre-screener tool. So before you even get an interview, they can see where your dispositions are to see where you might fit into their school. Really neat. What's interesting about these measurable skills and dispositions, that the tool that I plan to use for my observations has 9 dispositions that are very connected and linked with these same measurable dispositions that Haberman discusses as in his book. Okay. Benson and Peterson believed in, you got a question? You go back.
The Haberman slide, to amplify this is what Dr. Clark was really talking about. I went through Haberman, I did a year with them. They were training me to identify potential star teachers. But they came from free service stuff.
Right. That's where all the data is coming from. That's the problem.
The Haberman, see, that's the thing. Haberman was all free service.
Yes.
And the reason that I went through it, or that the district put me through it, was to try to identify in hiring beginning teachers,
Right.
which ones were going to be the stars.
Right.
So all that stuff was free service.
Mm-hmm.
None of it was actually from on the job.
Right.
I actually met Dr. Haberman. We had him come to Charlotte. He came and did the program for us in Charlotte. We paid him like $1 million. He came and did his star teacher program for us in Charlotte. I went through that. And so, but it was all free service.
Yes, yes. And these are the conversations Carrie and I have been having for like years now. But it's the thing that, what are we identifying in free service teachers, and then what do we do? I mean, once we send them out there, you're like, okay, see you
It's
later.
back to that assessing, tracking, and monitoring, but
Right.
it's not happening.
Right, and it goes back.
And I'm seeing that impact
I
in
don't-
classrooms.
Y'all-
Student scores.
I thought about this, and I thought about this recently during the CAPE process, when we talked about principal rating. That principal rating was more about dispositional behaviors than about effectiveness in terms of EVOS scores, principal rating, but it's not clear that that's what it is. I mean, if you were asking me, the closest thing that we approximate to doing dispositional assessment of teachers would be their principal rating, but it's not set up that way. So that's kind of a rabbit hole not to go down.
Evaluation
That's
system
a
that
whole
we use
14
doesn't-
other dissertations.
Exactly. So my point is, don't be fooled by that. I would not get into principal rating.
No.
I like that you linked it to EVOS and effectiveness. That's a false path going down that principal rating. That has so many other things that don't have anything to do with dispositions or effectiveness.
Right. Well, and that's the thing that I always wonder about this, and we'll wonder until we get Carrie's results, are is it, once they leave pre-service teaching, does it matter the culture they go into? I mean, it's instinctively I say, of course it does. But how much of this carries on if we were rating them super highly on dispositions, and then they get out into the field and fall apart, and there's no measurement, there's no loophole, there's no following through. And you're right, except for when you look at the North Carolina instrument, it's all skills, so it's and knowledge. So there's no.
There has to be an awareness
And there's
of
not-
that first before
Yeah.
we can do something about it. And it has to be an awareness that's the bigger picture, which is what I'm hoping this
Yeah,
will do.
and
I'm
so,
hoping.
yeah, you're right. Dr. Clarksville, she's exactly right. It really doesn't have anything to do. We assume that it does, but it's not borne out by the actual instrument. So I would not go in that direction. I mean, that looks like it might be a life raft, but it's not. That's 14 other studies.
Well, because there's so many holes in that instrument.
That's what I mean.
Later
It's-
down the road, right?
That instrument's
Right.
not even good to do that.
Well,
And Carrie, that will lead to one of my questions later in terms of administrators doing one of the observations. That touches on, and I don't want to get into it yet, but a question that I have in terms of, well, a lot of things in terms of potential personal bias and et cetera, but it did make me kind of think about that I want to remember to ask you about it.
Yes, please let me know when that comes up.
Okay.
So, okay. So what that means is as we move forward through the literature review, we have to be careful that we make sure that we do more review on the phenomenology side. That we don't. It would be easy just to go back and look at review principal ratings and those kinds of things. I don't think that's a good idea.
But I think she steered away from that.
Yeah, I
She
have.
focused on disposition.
She has.
I just mentioned that they do,
Yeah.
that's pre-screener
Yeah,
does do both.
but this
Right.
stuff,
Is where you need to go.
yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Just another study. This one I chose because it was a little bit related to mine, but again, pre-service beginning
Mhm.
teachers. But Benson and Peterson believed in moving beyond the acquisition of knowledge and skills and acquiring positive and effective dispositions. They wanted to test if the behaviors of teachers entering the education programs correlated with their behaviors in K-12 schools. So they surveyed 43 faculty members. They were different disciplines and roles in 30 NCATE accredited certification programs. And the data that they identified had 3 emerging themes. Civility and compliance, which was of greatest importance. They responded that uncooperative attitudes were not welcome in a professional environment, and that one should welcome it. Is expected to follow the rules with a positive attitude. 2, diversity and tolerance was aligned to state mandates and professional ethics regarding the treatment of individual students. And then the 3rd one, emotional and social maturity, was personally focused around the candidate's capacity to integrate all aspects of teaching in any typical classroom environment. Again, these 3, you'll be able to see how they can be embedded in those 9 dispositions in the tool that I plan to use. But just another similar study that I tried to pick out. Okay. What do I want to know? My research questions. The first one, what professional dispositions impact student success in the learning environment as measured by the Education Value Added System? We all know that as EVA. And 2, what observed behaviors do effective practicing teachers demonstrate that stimulate student success? And 3, to what extent do teachers' self-professed dispositions correlate with the observations of an administrator? Hang tight. Hang tight. The school that I would like to do my study in is a secondary school with grades 6 through 8. I would like to have a maximum of 12 teachers, preferably 4 from each grade, that have been at the school for 3 consecutive years and have EVOS scores. I'm going to be doing a mixed methods design, so that's dependent upon the cooperation of the qualitative and the quantitative processes to help me answer my research questions. The qualitative data is going to include teacher interview, where I have chosen 8 questions from another doctoral research dissertation that has been proven valid and reliable based on research. Quantitative data will include teacher self-assessment, observations done through a tool that I've chosen through myself, as well as an assistant principal, and then the EVOS scores. So this method will identify if there's a difference between what teachers profess to believe versus what is observed in their actions. I'm going to triangulate the data using a convergent parallel mixed method design. So I'm going to analyze the data separately and then combine the qualitative and the quantitative data to compare those results and then identify if they confirm or disconfirm each other. In a moment, I am going to share with you a timeline for when I'm going to collect this data, as well as how I will analyze it, but I'd like to show you my instrumentation first. I'm going to be taking a phenomenological approach, so I really want to look through the world of teachers' perspectives, and this is a study of a person's lived experiences as they relate to a concept or phenomenon. This approach will be used to understand the features of professional dispositions and each teacher's shared experiences in the learning environment. I'm hoping it will provide a deep level of learning for educators, potential transformation of consciousness, heightened perceptiveness, and increased thoughtfulness.
All right, what's your phenomenon?
Dispositions. Yes. Yes. So I will be focusing on what each teacher has in common with the phenomenon of dispositions. Using these 8 questions, and for example, number 1, and these, I did keep the 2 that I had before, and then I added these others. But what have you experienced in education that has changed your beliefs and values in the learning environment? They should be able to tell me from their experiences, their educational training, to be able to answer this question. My hopes. They will. Right?
Okay.
Okay.
Now, here's where I won't speak for Dr. Sumner, but this may be where her concerns as mine would lie as well, in terms of who's going to be giving these, who's going to be conducting these interviews.
Me.
And
Only
who's going to be analyzing the data from the interviews.
I'm going to be using deduce. I also have another doctoral candidate that's gone through the program, and they are going to also go through this with me to make sure that it's all valid and reliable using the deduce program.
Yeah, it's a good qualitative.
It's a program that will identify patterns and themes, frequencies.
We've had quite a
I
few.
mean, as long as it does that, I mean, we just switched over to Qualtrics. What were we using right before Qualtrics?
Deduce is the one that we've been using, to my knowledge. I don't know what you guys in the
We were using
LS side were
an LS, we were using a different one, and I'm trying to remember.
Sydney County Deduce.
Jim was the owner of it, he was the one that had it. Lerma, we had one. I mean, as long as they'll all do the same thing and do them well. The issue becomes with who does the bias part comes is if you do the interviews. That's hard to control for. I'm not hard and fast. I'm not going to dig my heels in on that one, but I'm going to tell you, you'd be a lot better off if you have somebody else conduct the interviews.
And your suggestion for that might be who?
Another doctoral student. Another co-worker. I mean, it becomes sometimes when you hire people to do it, it costs money though.
So
It answers any questions that you have of bias. I mean, you can do the quantitative work because the numbers are the numbers. But the qualitative work, even though you're analyzing with deduce, it's about questioning and cluing, you know. Again, I did all this training, didn't learn anything. I spent a year with Gallup. Spent a real year with them to learn to do interviews. They call it being a receiver. They claim that interviewing is much more than just reading the questions. And so either if you have been trained to be an interviewer or a receiver, Either that or the person doesn't have to have been, but since you're untrained and you're the researcher, that does bring about questions of bias.
But my argument there would be this is a phenomenological study, and so this is not the hard and fast questions. Like
Right.
that's the part of being able, as the researcher, for her to be able to explore further into the phenomenon. For example, if they're talking about situations and experiences that are in service, she might need to ask, is there anything from your pre-service that you can remember
Well,
that someone else wouldn't be able to?
right.
I think that's the purpose of phenomenology.
Yeah, but the idea here is more whatever you do, you have to do with everyone. I can show you, you can walk across the hall and look at a Gallup notebook in terms of how to conduct an interview. It even has the follow-up question script. You have to do the same for everybody.
So if I was, what you're saying is if I were to ask question 1, I can't ad-lib anything else to kind of provoke anything else out of them. I need to basically say
If you
question
do-
1, get their response, and then I'm
If you do, then you got to do it for everybody else in question.
But that's only one type of interview. That's the fixed protocol. Like there are other protocols.
There are,
allow you to
you're
do
exactly
that.
right. There are others that you can do. And I'm sitting here thinking about, but to match, you got to match your interview protocol to the material and what you're trying to achieve. One of the things that I worry about is if you're trying to dig in and get a richness of data, that you may dig deeper just by people's response back to you. You may dig deeper on some than others.
That's from the city structure.
And then what happens when you do that, it kind of throws your patterns off when you do your analysis. Then your patterns, you don't really develop the patterns, they're just too random. I'm thinking about when you run it through your program, if you didn't dig the same level on everybody, generally your patterns, you're looking for patterns in your data. Your patterns will be much more random if you didn't do the same for everybody. If you didn't dig as deep.
to make sure I stay the
So what you might want to do is you can do it online, is do a quick, kind of like a little staff development on how to conduct an interview, the type that you want to do. If you were dead set on doing them yourself and not get something, then I think you need, make sure that you kind of review the protocol of how to do an interview. And that would satisfy me. You don't have to spend a year with Gallup, but you need to learn how to do an interview. It's not as easy as people think, just reading the questions. It's not. I would have thought that too, because I was a quantitative person. And before I went through the Gallup process, I would have thought, well, let's just read the questions. Anybody do that. Unfortunately, it's not. And so to add some validity to what you're doing, and for the reliability piece, which is the same for everybody, they're online. You can do a quick and dirty primer on how to conduct interviews, phenomenological interviews, and make sure that you assure yourself and your reader that you are even-handed and consistent. And I think your patterns will emerge much better in your data that way as well. That's just a practical thing.
Except for, is that truly the spirit of phenomenological study? Like it's
a good question.
fully qualitative. A true phenomenological study would be fully qualitative, in which the person is just going in and digging into their lived experiences. So you ask one question.
You don't, but it's not even scripted.
Right, like Jeff did one, and it's completely
yeah,
wide open.
it's just exactly. It's not even
That's why
a true phenomenology.
Right.
Is not even scripted. You just go in and start a conversation.
That's why if she's doing a semi-structure interview, she's kind of merging both worlds.
Yeah, but if you're going to put it in a program and look for patterns, you give yourself the best opportunity to develop those patterns.
So the question I want to find out with that one is going to be number 1.
That's correct.
What professional dispositions
Right.
impact? So that's what I'm looking for out of that tool and interviews.
And I think that starting with the same point and digging in, because in any of those programs, she has to go code them. Like she has to read each thing and code it. So the patterns are going to develop. They may not be as prevalent though, in some as in others. But then that's part of the phenomenon. She can say that this person's lived experience was this versus what this person talked about. I honestly don't know.
And my concern with this along the same line is that we're talking about, and Carrie, I'm not sure, like with this newer version, if you've changed some of this, but we're talking about an incredible amount of time for you to do all the things that you're saying you're going to do. I mean, we're talking about an interview. You do 12 interviews. That's in addition to everything else. We're talking about a significant amount of time. I don't know if doing this in written form is even possible, but I think somewhere we need to look at, of all the different data points that you're collecting, if there's a way to have something address more than one of your questions, or think about this, because I don't want it to be unmanageable in terms of all of the data you're trying to collect.
Right, and the original one that you all read had just those top number 1 and 2 questions, and I was going to have them write a written response. I wasn't going to conduct an interview. But then when I went back and thought about the quality of the response that I may or may not get from a teacher because they're writing it, I was worried I wouldn't get enough meat around the question to be able to help me find patterns and themes. So that's why I turned to doing the interview questions in hopes that people would just talk and say more than the written part.
If they were written, it would eliminate the potential bias that Dr. Lamb is talking about. And again, you're right. They might write answers so brief, the responses may be so brief that you can't really get anything from it. I don't know, but that could potentially both be an enormous time saver, and everyone would get the same written set of questions. I don't know. I mean, I defer to the suggestion of the committee. I'm just thinking, yes, there's potential for bias based on asking all of these 8 questions with 12 different individuals, and also just the incredible amount of time involved.
See, the issue is in any mixed methodology is you need larger numbers for your quantitative work. You need smaller, Dr. Summer was talking about, you need smaller numbers to make it manageable for your qualitative work. Therein lies the rub. If you just interview 4 and that's all the data we collect on the quantitative side, our analysis tells us that that's not enough for it to be significant, no matter what we find. You have to apply to your power analysis speaks to your sample size, and pulling 12 teachers out of how many is that's that what's your population? I mean, your sample's 12. What's your population?
1,000.
See, I mean, you're already running the risk of your sample size being irrelevant and getting any statistical significance out of it because you're only pulling 12 out of 1,000. But then again, we'd like to have the data from 300 or 400 out of that 1,000. But even 12 is going to be a monumental chore to enter. Right. That's why I said most people think about hiring it done professionally. Simply, I know it costs, but it's a time factor, and they've been trained to do it. You can train yourself quick and easy online for Google, interview methodology, for interviews from phenomenological research. You can put yourself, but you still, as Dr. Summer says, it's going to take an incredible amount of time to do these, record them, code them, do all that. It's 12. I mean, normally when you do interviews, 6 is kind of the limit, but you need 12 on the quantitative side.
So would you recommend doing a sample of the 12 for interviews?
Well, you're doing match pairs here. Basically, is what you're doing. You're taking their test scores and pairing it with their disposition. That's
right.
What we call a match pair. That's right. You can't really get away from 12. can't really get away, as a methodologist, now you're in my ballpark, we can't do that. Mostly what we're talking about here today is stuff that's out over my head and out of my league without the methodology part. You're gonna have to have 12. Because it's basically, this is a matched pair study. We're matching, the pair is their score versus their interview. And we match all 12 of them. This is matched pairs. We're collecting 2 separate and distinct pieces of data from each of these. And when we're matching that, does their dispositional behaviors and their scores match? That's basically what you're doing here, and you're doing it 12 times.
So what's the happy medium, do you guys think? Because Carrie and I spent a long time discussing what to do with this, because the devil's advocate in me says, so what if I write for question 2? None. I mean, honestly, what if she sends this out to 12 people and gets nothing useful as an email or type response?
Not to suggest changing the whole nature of this study, and Carrie, you know, I absolutely adore you, so I even hesitate to say this, but since you have access to the EVOS data, why not look just at teachers who've met or exceeded growth in that 3-year time period and do the interviews and the observations with them and see what dispositions are more likely to be seen? Or and again, I hesitate to even say that. I'm just putting out there, like, why not do it that way and just make it qualitative?
So my original thought around that was to sort of do a double blind and go in without knowing what anyone's EVOS score was.
Well, that's kind of,
Because I didn't want that to change my perception when I observed them or asked these questions.
when you're doing this, that's part of it. You're not supposed to know.
Right. And yes.
And that'll leave it as part of the bias.
Yes.
That's part of the bias. That
Right.
eliminates the bias. You're not supposed to know what their scores are. Right. And that's kind of the heart of the study is you don't know. If you're doing Crestwell, I mean, if you're doing convergent parallel, you're supposed to. I know it's probably, I guess it's an inappropriate term to use now. When I came through graduate school, they called it a Chinese wall that you could never see over. You weren't supposed to see over that wall. That would cause bias if you did. Right. Even if you control for it, you weren't supposed to see over the wall if you were doing mixed methodology. That was just the best practice is not to know. When you're doing like a match pairs like this, you're not supposed to know what the scores are.
And I hear what you're saying, but I really do. And if you keep it mixed methods, yes, I totally get that. Yeah. I guess I'm just wondering if it's sort of like Marzano's work. Like, you know, do we want to look at everybody or do we want to look at the people who are having success and say, what is it? What kind of dispositions? Do they have some more than others? Do they have all of them? You know, what specific things are these people who are doing well? Because, you know, without kind of making too much of an uneducated guess, I would think that the folks who are not there with EVOS are probably missing a number of these dispositions. So I guess I'm just, you know, from the research part of me wants to know, okay, the people who are making that happen, are there patterns in their dispositions that we can learn from and say, okay, this is what we really need to work on in terms of professional development and coaching?
So Carrie and I also discussed that at length early on in the process, and we basically got to, yes, but what if some of those teachers who are low performing on EVOS are exhibiting the same dispositions?
That's true.
Because what we're saying is dispositions matter hugely with teachers, but we've only ever looked at pre-service teachers. So we don't really know if for these in-service people, it does actually make a difference with student learning. We say we assume that it does because we looked at them in pre-service. But so that was why we ended up saying, let's look at all 12 of them and then go from there. Right.
And I think it could be more difficult to get teachers on board if I select them through their EVOS without
Yeah.
randomly volunteering for this without knowing.
And then she has that bias, again, back of knowing these are excellent teachers, so.
Yes.
Yeah,
right,
I
like,
hear you.
those are the pieces. I agree. I mean, these are all things that we really have talked about, and this is a challenging study. Like
It
Carrie has
really
picked
is.
something that
Yeah.
we
But
wrestled
in
with for
the
a long
end,
time.
Right.
you know, I don't know many things. But in the end, it all comes back to Hertzberg in the end. Everything comes back to Hertzberg. Motivational theory, Hertzberg's motivational theory. One of the mistakes that we make when we use his conceptual framework, satisfiers and dissatisfiers, when we talk about why people do or don't do things, why they stay, why they leave, those kind of, it always goes back to Hertzberg. Everything, even this, goes back to Hertzberg. Problem is most people only work on one side, not on both. They try to find out why people stay. I mean, why people go. It's just as important to know why they stay.
Right. You gotta have both sides of it.
You have to do both sides. And so that's what we're talking about here. If we know these are what the good teachers do, we need to know what the bad teachers do as well. We have to know both sides.
And to truly explore the phenomenon, you have to look at
You
both
have-
sides. The problem is, Dr. Summer, it is the same thing. Like, I would think, oh, well, let's just kick the quantitative data and just truly do a phenomenological study, but then that still doesn't tell us, well, how are the students performing on the measures that we say
Matter.
matter? Like, the teacher can say, oh, they all get A's and I'm a star teacher. Okay, great, but that's not how we as a society anymore judge good teaching. It's
Yeah, I definitely don't think you can leave that out.
right.
But, you know, back again, beat the same old drum, Hertzberg. You can't assume because you know why they left that you know why they stayed. That's a completely different thing. And sometimes, and what we find is it's more important to work on that side. We always want to work on the other side. What can we do to keep them from leaving? No, we need to accentuate why they stay. In your study, we need to know the bad things that they do, or the things that the good people don't do, as much as what they do. Because it may be the fact that these people do some of the right things, they do some bad things that counteract that, or it may be they don't do any of the right things.
And
We don't know
I'm
that.
looking to see that you tell me that you do these things, but when I come in and see them, are
Yes.
they actually happening in your
Exactly.
behaviors? And that's what I want to know.
You know the least reliable form of data is self-report.
Yes.
Oh, I mean, it's kind of like you've heard me say 1,000 times, you can't survey for best practices, because what will teachers tell you?
I'm doing
Oh, I'm doing
it.
it.
I'm doing it.
Which my quantitative piece is also asking them to do as well.
Exactly.
Right. So how about this?
Yes.
I love this conversation. I don't know that we've
No, you
narrowed
don't.
it down yet.
You're kind to say.
No, I do. You really don't understand. I do. I'll go through the next pieces and show you how I plan to analyze it. And then maybe after we look at that tool, see if, like, I don't want to minimize this because I think it's very important, but I don't know that it's the main thing that I'm after, because I think my other observation tool is also going to answer question 1 as well.
Well, but
Yes.
see, but remember, your study is only as good as your methodology. I freely admit that this is not the important piece. How you going to, what you're going to do, how you're going to analyze what you're going to do. But how you collect it is the most important piece. That tells us what you can do with it later on. How you collect it. You can, I mean, that determines the analysis that you can do. You have to set that up in the business, that would be called a priori, up front. You have to set up your collection in order to do your analysis later on. That determines it. Too many people are focused on how they're going to analyze it, and then don't sit and try to work through the tough beats, which is how am I going to get it? They just assume. One of the problems we have in research is we assume past the problem. Once I'm up on top of the mountain, I'll try to figure out how to plant the flag. Well, you've assumed all the way to the top of the mountain. I'm worried about getting you up to the top. I figure you can figure out the flag, deal and get you up there. That's where we are right now. Is we have to work out the method piece on how you're going to who, what, where, and when of data collection before we can worry about analysis. That's why chapter 3 comes before chapter 4. Always.
But I think you need to see her other
Yeah.
instruments in light of this,
Yeah.
so that, because we literally have been debating this for a
Right.
while, thinking about what is the best way to get this data, because I agree, 12 interviews is a ton,
Well,
and there's a lot of data that's
as-
gonna come out of that.
as I read through this, this is the only part that I have. I'll hush after this. This is the only part that I have. I'm concerned that doing 12 interviews is a lot, but I'm also concerned to make sure that nobody can go back and say, well, you found what you were looking for. What do you mean? Well, you already had it in your mind. So if you can assure your reader, that there wasn't bias in the interview process. That's why I said, I'm not one of them people that dig in. We've got some colleagues here that absolutely can't do your own interviews. They won't sit on a committee where the person does their own interview. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying to allay those questions and issues down the line. If you want to tackle 12, you go. But at least tell us your expertise or your experience or what you've done to assure that when you do the interviews that you will make them as bias-free as possible. And I can live with that.
So that could be in the limitation section.
Mm-hmm. It is. And then if you want to tackle this, I mean, this is a lot. As long as you know what you're signing up for.
Okay. Maybe we can brainstorm a happy medium later. But
Okay.
I mean, it won't cause me any consternation if you decide later on, wow, I don't want to be as old as them when I finish, so I think I'll hire this done. That'd be fine. I mean, that's one of those things that, sometimes you have to adjust on the fly. You wouldn't be the first one.
And that's part of the beauty of a phenomenological study as well, is that if you encounter a hiccup, and that's the other thing is, there's always the option to send this as a written, and then if you don't get enough, go back and do actual interviews.
Well,
Karen's like, yeah, I like that, I like that.
I like that. That works.
well, now again, this is what I like. I like to send a written into a focus group. That way it's a shot.
That's true too.
That seems like a much smoother possibility.
That's what I like.
Okay.
Just
Like
me.
that a lot.
Okay.
I
That's what-
totally agree.
In order to do that, you send it out written, and you even have your follow-up questions, sub-questions. That's what I was talking about.
Okay.
So you've got question number 1. What potential follow-up questions would you ask for that? You also have those. And then when you get that back, then you convene a focus group, one-shot deal.
For clarification.
Okay.
And you don't have to, there's no, and then we don't have to worry about your expertise as an interview. Focus groups, they are truly a phenomenon in themselves.
That is true.
And you don't have to validate them.
Okay.
And then that's 1 as opposed to 12.
Exactly, that's 1 as opposed to
With
12.
your group.
And there's no issue with validity then. It's not about your qualifications as an interview when you do focus groups.
I like that. I like that.
So
Yeah, I
that's
like
what
that too.
that's what we
I
do a
think we
lot
can
of.
live with that.
Yeah.
That's smart.
Is move it into that to that arena. You get the same quality and richness of data, I believe, but you do it in a much more manageable way, time-wise and money-wise.
And I'm gonna have them as a group there to complete the EDA
There you
on
go.
their own, so I'll already have them. I won't even have to ask them to come back.
Yeah.
I can do it that time.
Yes, you can.
That's right. And then if you don't have 12, which I'm not sure you're gonna actually have 12 show up, that's the hope, but if you don't have 12, then it still works.
Okay.
Focus group, as long as you've got 6, you're golden.
Right,
Okay, I like that.
Yep.
Awesome. Great. Okay,
yay.
thank you. You ready, Miss Dr. Sumner? Yes, okay, all right. So the quantitative tool is the Educator Disposition Assessment, the EDA. Gardner-Webb uses this tool for their candidates. It's Lines and CAPE standards and MTAS standards. 0 to 2 Likert scale, which is what makes it the quantitative. The 0 is needs improvement, 1 is for developing, and 2 is meets expectations. And then, so these are the 9 dispositions, and then the 27 indicators are those observable behaviors. The assistant principal and myself have already done an inter-rater reliability together to see how we, and this might answer your question, Dr. Sumner, so that we wanted to see how we were rating during some little, we met with the professor from Tampa, Dr. Almerico, we sat together and did this training with her. So we were very much aligned to our rater reliability. It was very high. So she felt like we had a good match going in to do these observations without bias.
Okay, thank you. That helps.
Yes, yeah, we've gone through that already. So,
Okay.
Okay.
Is that stated in chapter? I'm sorry, I just know that, so I don't know if
I believe I
said
did
it
say that in there.
I read that.
Yeah, okay.
I just want to make sure it's in there, because that's important.
Okay. Any questions about this one? All right. So this is the timeline of when I plan to collect all this lovely data. I'll do the quantitative observations first. I had originally in there 3 observations. I had narrowed it down to 2. I'm going to do 1 in the classroom for 50 minutes and hopefully get an, oh gosh, what is the word?
Transition.
Thank you.
Change your class.
Transitioning.
Yeah,
It's good for me. While they're doing 50-minute lesson and then a transition. And then the second interview for myself will be they call it a tier talk meeting. This is when teachers are going to be in a group with other teachers talking about students. And then my assistant principal is just going to do 1 observation in a 50-minute lesson with a transition, and just choosing that one based on her knowledge of her teachers already. Once those are completed, I'll move into maybe even having that focus group, because this looks like it's changing a little bit, having them come together, give them a brief explanation of the EDA tool, and let them do a self-assessment on a recent lesson. And it's looking like I might make some changes to these interview questions and doing that focus group at the same time that I'm doing this. So I'll definitely make that change if that's what we decide we're going to go with. And then finally, once all that's completed, then I'll move into looking at those EVA scores, taking an average of the 3 consecutive years. Does that help a little bit? Okay. So how will I analyze it? Feel free to nitpick this one. Yes.
Go any further, are we good with
The focus group.
the focus group, the written, the focus group, and the continuation of the observations and those things?
Yes. Again, I mean, I feel like I'm going to stress the same thing with the observations. I understand needing a transition, but do you need to do the full 50 minutes? I mean, and I'll give you for instance, 15, 20 minutes, I can get a whole lot of information. I may not get everything, but you've also got the AP doing an observation as well.
I think I was thinking about a normal evaluation for teachers around 45 minutes. So I was thinking to do, and this is a secondary school. Their lessons are going to be slightly longer than what I'm used to seeing in elementary.
Yeah. I mean, a full observation is going to be 50 minutes, but for
Walkthroughs.
For a veteran teacher, they're usually just about 25, 30 minutes. I mean, only in their evaluation year would you need this full.
Right.
So,
When we went through the tool and broke down each disposition and all the behaviors, I think my concern is, am I going to see all of those things? I know that I won't see them all,
Right.
but I wanted to give myself enough time
Right.
to see as much as possible.
Right. And I also will say, having taught quite a bit in those 90-minute blocks, there are days and moments that my attitude with those kids when they walk in and my attitude with those kids when they leave changes.
I agree. I've been there. I know.
You know?
I mean, the heart of this whole study is that kids that need love the most deserve it the least. I mean, we all understand that.
Right, right. But
Whole lesson, even when they leave.
so that's what I'm wondering if, that was part of the whole thought behind the longer time. But I agree.
I'm a little bit trying to be protective of you, Carrie, and just say, I'm feeling a little better since with the way you're going to do the interview. written first. But
My job is right now more flexible and is allowing me to, I wouldn't move if you paid me to right now. It's not my dream job, but I'm liking where I am right now. I'm in my 3rd year and I feel very comfortable with the flexibility that I have to be able to go to this school and conduct this study.
okay.
I think that is something that's on my side. If it takes me a while, then I understand that as well. I think it just means a lot to me to get it done right. I agree.
Could we say maybe at least 25 or 30 minutes, and then if you end up staying longer for them, you can, rather than being cut and dried about the 50 minutes? Because I guess, I mean, I know there are things to observe no matter what's going on. I hate for you to be tied down to that every time. But again, it's, it's totally up to, if you want to do it, more power to you.
What do you
All right, quantitative man.
want? He's thinking about
No,
that.
Well, if you do 15-minute walkthroughs, you have to do more. So you end up with the same amount of time. Do you want to go wider or deeper? There you go.
All right.
But
I'm
that's,
good with that.
yes.
If it were me, I can tell you right now, if it were me, but remember, my training is on the LS side, I'd do more walkthroughs.
Yeah.
It wouldn't save me any time. I'd do three or four of those for every one of the 50s. Because that's how we're trained to do it. We do it in 15 minutes.
And for me, I have a low attention span, so I have to do mostly walkthroughs. So
Well, and honestly, you collect better data because you see it over time.
Yeah.
Going into one 50-minute segment, and that's why Molly's going to do the other, and that's why you're going to observe them in multiple places. So, and the 50-minute one is the in-class one. The other one may not be a 50-minute. It's
Right.
the time of the tier meeting. And we might need to make that clear.
Okay.
So it's not 2 50-minute observations. It's one 50-minute
I've
classroom
kind of written it that
observation
way, but I'm not sure how
And-
long that one is. I'll
yeah.
find out.
and one meeting time,
Mhm.
whatever that may be. So that may give you a little bit more freedom.
In our business, we say if you can't figure it out in 15 minutes, then the problem's yours.
Does the time matter? Does the time matter?
It
If I
does.
do
It
this,
does.
I've collected what I'm, okay.
It
Yes.
does.
Okay.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Because if somebody wanted to replicate your study, and they will,
Okay.
they're gonna need to know exactly what you did.
Mm-hmm. And you need to be consistent.
Right.
Can't do some 15s and some 50s.
Got it.
You gotta make a decision. I personally prefer
A bunch of 15.
a bunch of 15s over a longer period of time.
although as flexible as your job right now is, Carrie, that probably is a little less practical than getting it out in the 50-minute chunk.
It's
Right.
it's much less practical.
Which is why Carrie went with this.
Yeah, I mean,
For the fact that she's a working,
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's
ideally, she would be in there day in and day out for multiple days.
exactly.
Ideally, but that's not
Yeah.
feasible.
But if you
In the tier talk meetings, I could end up getting more than one teacher in there, so I could probably
Right, so
get
that might be
multiple
less.
data on teachers at the same time without having to go to several of
Good
those.
point, 'cause that's a grade
The
level.
assistant principal mentioned that generally happens.
the key here in your methodology is that you define it and that whatever it is you say you're going to do, that you do, and that you document that. It's so that it can be replicated at some point in the future. That's just fidelity. You got to do what you say you're going to do, and be consistent with it.
All right,
All right,
observation.
okay.
I mean.
That's all right. No, this is the analysis plan. These are the EDA observations that I will be conducting. So I'll be finding the average score of those 2 observations that I'm doing, the one in the lesson and then the one in the tier talk meeting. I'm going to use the Spearman's row correlation analysis to compare that to the EVA scores. These results are hoping to answer question 1, what professional dispositions impact student learning and the success in the learning environment? And question 2, what observed behaviors do effective practicing teachers demonstrate that stimulate student success? With the assistant assistant principal's observations basically the same way, but I'll also use that data against the teacher self-assessments, answering questions 1 and 2, as well as 3, to what extent do observed behaviors correlate between teachers' self-professed dispositions and observations of an administrator.
I'm wondering if that should not just observations of an administrator. I'm wondering if that should just be observations.
Self-professed, because that, if we went that way,
That would be
then it
yours
helps you,
and.
if that interview, the focus group, it could answer that one instead of going to the administrator. Then I'm using the administrator for more validity about what else do another doctoral
Another
participation.
set of eyes on that whole position. If that's your third observation, then that's your triangulation right there. It's the 3 data points. She's doing 1. So that's what I'm wondering, if you need to add your observations there to that question, it should be just observations. So that's yours and hers, and then their disposition, looking at all of that data together.
That seems cleaner.
And if you guys have that reliability already, you've established your iterator reliability, yours are going to be fairly similar. So that just gives you a better picture of where they are. That's what I would do. Now that we're talking
So
about
you're
it.
saying take this one out?
No,
completely, or-
leave the question, just take out observations of an administrator and just leave with observations. Then you can use both your data and her data.
Okay.
Still do the Spearman's Row, but it's all the data, all the observational data.
Okay. Shall I go on? All right. This up here says the teacher self-assessment. So I will use the Spearman's relation between those observations and their self-assessment scores, answering questions 1 and 2. I'm going to analyze this lots of ways, run it lots of ways. The teacher interviews, which is now the focus group, will interview. I will still be coding that for themes and frequency. Can still use that for with the deduce program, and that data will be merged into quantitative variables, and then I'll combine that with the quantitative data. And then finally, and that's going to answer question 1. It looks like it might answer question 3 now as well. Add that in, correct? Professed, right? And then the EVA scores, identifying the average score of those 3 years, using the Spearman's Row to compare that to EDA observations, teacher self-assessments, the focus group interviews, using that Likert scale of strong, weak, or no correlation, answering questions 1 and 2. Questions about this section?
Do you guys feel like she's done a good job of getting the data she's going to need to answer these questions?
I can run, I think what's neat about this is
Definitely.
run this so many different ways.
Oh,
once
yeah,
I get
once
it.
you get into it,
Yeah.
it's going to be so cool.
All right, the Spearman's Row correlation calculates coefficient RS or P, meaning rho, which is a measure of the strength and direction of the association relationship between 2 continuous or ordinal variables. So I'm going to use this to identify if there's a correlation between the EDA instrument results, the focus group interview questions, and then the teacher eval scores. The 3 assumptions that I need to consider are: 1, are those 4 ordinal variables measured continuously? Are they signify paired observations? And then I need to determine if there's a monotonic relationship between the 2 variables. So monotonic being if the value of the eval score shows high growth, so does the value of the disposition. Okay, so what this looks like in the coefficient range is that you have 0.60 to 0.10. It's going to signify a high positive correlation between the variables. For this study, it would signify a strong correlation between teacher dispositions and teacher eval scores. And then 0.0 to 0.40 is going to signify that weak correlation.
Can you go back a slide?
Yes.
In your first bullet, checking the Google there. I don't like the language of your first one. Spearman's row is a correlation. It's not association or relationship. Those terms have different meaning in research. You're not using them in that way, but that's confusing to people.
So is it just relationship?
No, it's just correlation. Spearman's row is a correlation. Association is measured by other tests, not Spearman's row. Association is a measure, but that's not what Spearman's row does. It does correlation, as you got there. So strength and direction of the correlation between two continuous orbitals. See, we have other tests for association, and that's not nearly as strong as correlation.
Right.
So we would have to go with a test for association. You're trying to prove a correlation here, which is the strongest. Relationship.
Your actual research question, it says correlation though, correct?
Right,
Yes.
it does.
Yeah.
That's why I
She's
said,
running a Spearman's row.
exactly. She's running the road for correlation, but she wants to, she's trying to, it's a measure of the direction associated between two. No, it's a measure of the strength direction of the association between two continuous. He may have stated that in the.
Yeah, that is what Larry says.
That's what he said. But for what you're doing, I guess that's what I said. I have a problem with that one.
Okay.
I know that's what he said,
I can change it to that.
but
Yeah.
but we need to make sure that everybody understands we're not doing any tests for association or relationship.
So we're just measuring the strength and direction of the
Association,
correlation.
you usually do some sort of a survey for frequency. That's normally how we measure association. We do a survey, and there's no right or wrong answer on a survey. There's always somebody's opinion. So we do a frequency distribution to try to determine if there's an association. That's the terminology we use. You're going much deeper than that. Don't sell yourself short. You're doing a correlational study here on your quantitative fees, which is the hardest, most difficult, the most highest level. If somebody reads that, they think you're going to do something. Well, where's the survey data for associating? No, we're not doing that. Now, you're doing a correlational study here, and you're exactly right. If you go to your next slide, I mean, you've got actual parameters you've set up a priori here that tell us this is what we're looking for. We're not going to go find it and then argue it. If we don't get these, then see that you don't do that with association.
Okay.
Coefficient is the strongest of all of the in inferential statistics. Correlation is the strongest data that we offer.
Thank you for clarifying that.
And so, we have to basically call our shot over here with this slide. That we won't find something that's 0.21 and argue that that's a strong. We set it up front. It doesn't meet these parameters,
And it's not.
then it's not. And so, and we don't say there's a correlation unless it at least hits the moderate level. Back in my day, we couldn't report unless we hit 60 strong. I see a lot more in the moderate range now. But in my day, it had to be at least we would say there was no correlation if you couldn't hit 60. But you can say there's a correlation if you hit the moderate range. You can say there is a correlation. Now, if anything below that,
Well, there's no correlation or weak correlation, and that means that we're looking at the wrong thing.
Exactly. That's right. That's
Which happens.
We'll see.
And so, but that with the bad teachers, you may have a bad teacher. The less effective teachers, you may actually have negative correlation.
Yes.
And so it works the same way on the negative side.
That's true.
So, you got to be careful with your language and how you report. But
Right.
I love this. I love that you're upfront and you've said it. These are the levels that I will have to achieve to prove my point. If you're going for it, I like it.
Great. Awesome. This just brings me to my limitations and delimitations. Obviously, we've talked about number of teachers, and we've also talked about travel and work time. Teachers' awareness of this research study. I want to be vague, but tell them enough that they need to know, but not enough that it will hopefully not. I want it to be authentic when I go into that classroom. Delimitations are that I'm having the assistant principal only observe once, based on her knowledge of the teachers already, and then my choice to use the EDA over there are other disposition assessment tools, but I'm going to use this one. All right, that concludes my proposal defense for you all.
And just remember where we started, that you're going to have to link your results back in 5 to your theoretical frameworks and make sure that you keep an eye on that all the way through. And don't just wait till the end and say, oh, how am I going to do it? Just keep an eye on that as you go. Because that's kind of your guiding principle here as you go through this. And I think giving them a written set of questions and then doing the focus group will save you an inordinate amount of time. That just cuts your time in half.
Thank you. I like that
At
a lot.
least.
And this is what I was talking about when you have questions. If you're doing professional interviews, you have to tell us what your follow-up questions are going to be before you even start for it to be valid. So that we know that everybody gets the same thing. See, and these are the answers that you're looking for. But each one of these, see, that's the follow-up question. You can't wing those. That gives me problem. That gives us problem with validity. This is phenomenology. This is the phenomena. What we're trying to identify is the phenomena of being a great principal. That's what this program is. It identifies that, and it puts everything. All of the knowledge of that is in this book, and all the research in the background and all the chart is in this one. But the idea is there's a phenomenon of being a great principal. We're trying to identify people who do it. In that type of interview, you can't go off script at all. You must have your follow-up question script. They beat that in us over the course of all this time that I was with them. That this is a phenomenon that you're trying to identify, and that's exactly what you're trying to do as well. And you can't go off script. And so writing out your questions will prevent that from happening. You don't have to worry about it in focus group. You can go anywhere you want to in focus group. And that takes all that bias out of it, and that you have interpreted the data the way that suited your needs. You haven't done that. And in phenomenology, you notice on the other side of the page, if the answer that they give didn't match that one, you couldn't count it. There's also an expectation there's a right answer to these questions as well. And you don't have to worry about that if you're doing focus group either.
Oh, I like that. I'm glad you thought of that today. Thank you. That's awesome. I like it.
So if you don't mind, step out for just a second.
Sure.
We're going to chat and make sure we have all of our ducks in a row. And then
All right, sounds good.
Okay, so the biggest thing that I got is the change to the focus group.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then just taking out an administrator in question 3 so that she can use her observations and the administrator's
Right.
observations.
Yeah, she's talking about a 2-year deal here. This is 2 years. That will save her some time. Doing the focus group will save time. And you don't realize it when you bite this off how much time. I mean, that was when I read through this, I thought, this is great.
Yeah. And when I talked to Carrie, I'm not sure if she told either one of you, but she and her mom came, and it's very difficult to do professional development for my faculty and some of our consistent contract presenters because they're complete experts at it. But she did a phenomenal job of it. And anyway, one of the things that we were talking about, I said, you're looking at 2 or 3 years the way you've got this written. So you just need to know that going into it, like I don't see this is not a 6-month
Nope.
gig you're taking on here. So she seems to be fully aware of it.
Well, it may take two even now, but you're exactly right.
But at least this is a little pared down, and I think we'll certainly still get what she's looking for.
I think so, but it's infinitely more doable in a more reasonable amount
Yes.
of time.
Yes, I agree.
Well, both, are you both good to sign to move
Oh,
forward?
absolutely.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Dr. Lamb, I don't have a proposal form. Do you happen to have one?
There should be some in the folder right there.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, there's supposed to be some other.
I
I asked
forget that
Dr.
they move
Putnam.
all these things.
I asked Dr. Putnam to follow up with that, and so she said they'd be here, I hope.
Yep.
Yeah.
they're-
Yeah.
All right. 'Cause I told her that.
I'll sign. Dr. Sumner, are you okay if I sign and just I sign for you and initial?
Mhm. Yep, that sounds great. And if there's any problem with it, they can just fax it to me or
Yeah, no.
email and I can scan it back, but it should be okay.
That's the problem, so.
Yeah. And Dr. Lamb, thank you for setting this up. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
No,
I am now teaching at a high school near me, and so
That's what I heard.
I've forgotten a few things about this process.
Are you loving it?
I love it. Oh my
Oh.
gosh,
I'm jealous.
love it. My kids are phenomenal.
Oh.
I just go in there and shut my door and we do our thing. And
I love it. So where are you teaching?
Clover High School in
Yeah.
South Carolina.
Oh, that's awesome.
And my son's a senior there this year, so I'm there for all the senior stuff.
I'm so jealous.
Like I can't. Oh my gosh, it's wonderful.
I'm
I've got three
jealous.
kids.
My daughter would have died if I had done that last year, but I'm so jealous.
So luckily, it's such a huge school that I don't ever see him at school. Like we come home and I'm like, "Hey, did you hear about the fight today?" And he's like, "Yeah."
Yeah, I saw it.
But that's great. He's like, "You want to see the video?" I'm like, "No."
No,
That's
it's
pretty
great.
all right,
Yeah.
y'all want a copy of this video?
I think I'm good. I took notes. Oh, and will you both tell Carrie that I did take some notes. I'm sure you all have everything, but if she does want to see anything, I'm glad to share it with her.
All right, so
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So
Thank
you took notes, and I'll turn the record off now.
Yes.
She's out there hiding. People wander on down the hall. Oh, probably. He knows everything. Congratulations! I think you knew that was going to happen, but oh, I appreciate it.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Well deserved.
Woo! Well, thank you guys. We will reconvene for the final. In 4 years or 6 months.
Oh my gosh, no. Oh my God. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Congratulations.